Warning. This episode contains strong language and references to alcohol and violence. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of PauseCast. Today is June 9th, 2016. I am Jessica Alouette, and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Mark, and I use he, him. Welcome.
Welcome to episode 2. Episode 1 went really well, so we decided we'd throw a second one at you guys.
Yeah. Sorry. No, let's go on.
I didn't expect you to have a response to
right.
that.
Let's just keep going. What have you been playing?
What have I been playing? I have finished off Arkham City.
Yeah.
Which has been quite kind to me, I would say.
So that's the fourth game in the Arkham series, right? And it's the one that had some trouble on PC.
No, that is Arkham Knight. That's
Arkham Knight.
Most recent one.
Arkham City is the second one.
Yeah, Arkham City was the second one.
Okay,
and that
I have played that one.
It was like the most critically acclaimed one. We've talked about how you've played that.
Yeah, they've got such similar names I can get a bit confused.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever made this observation? Have you ever noticed how generic video game names are?
Quite often when I can pull up Steam now, look at the new releases, and yeah, so many of them are really, really generic.
Well, I mean, those are like this. Let's say a good solid 80% of new releases are just kind of like garbageware anyway, or shovelware, I should say.
Shovelware? I've not heard that term
Shovelware is the term that is used. Some of them are not, though, actually. Wasted, for example, there is actually quite good. I played a little bit of that. It's a little roguelike dungeon crawler shooter thing. It still feels like it's very early in development, but it's got a Borderlands kind of style, and it's interesting so far. So I'm looking forward.
What was it called again?
Wasted.
Wasted. Okay. That is a very generic name, though.
It's a very generic name, but it's also very clever at the same time, because it's a post-apocalyptic pub crawler.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
And yeah, so you are either getting wasted or getting wasted in the wastelands.
Yeah, it's the wasteland and the drinking thing that I clicked onto.
It's actually it's kind of nicely named. Good job, guys. But like, you got your Dragon Age, your Dying Light, your Tomb Raider, Mass Effect. All of these sound very generic.
I guess a lot of them are popular enough that you know it quite well. Like Mass Effect is well known enough that it sort of becomes non-generic. But a lot of the case, yeah. I was actually looking through a list of book titles earlier today, and wow, the number of books that start with the word dark or the word death. Wow. Which is particularly in the science fiction and fantasy genre as well.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
So many.
Oh, let me see how many games I have. 2 series of games that begin with the word dark. I have Dark Souls and Darksiders. Both really good games. But yeah, it's always just something I find kind of goofy that everything's kind of so generic.
Yeah, but I mean, names are hard. It's hard to come up with a name that is memorable and very recognizable.
Yeah.
Some games manage it really well. Some just, like, if you didn't know of a series already, then a name like The Elder Scrolls would sound very generic, I think. Whereas some other games, like, I think XCOM actually does a good job of being memorable and recognizable without being quite generic. It's not like a word already, and it's quite recognizable.
It's something that's kind of, it's made a name for itself. I still don't know what the hell XCOM stands for, though.
I'm not sure it stands for anything, to be honest. I'm not sure either.
It's gotta stand for something.
Maybe.
Did we introduce the purpose of the show? If we didn't, this is a show where we talk about video games. And what we've been playing, and what we've been enjoying, and aspects of the things that we do and don't like about games.
And hopefully, if you're listening, this isn't a surprise to you.
Yeah, hopefully you listened to the first episode. If you did, thank you. Thank you for joining us again and trusting us with that. It's a responsibility, I guess, sort of. And,
if you didn't, we won't spoil it. Go listen.
Yeah, maybe go check that out. There was some good discussions in there last week.
It was fun.
Yeah, and it was fun to do. So we're back again. And we actually have some news to kick us off the bat proper.
Yes, and I see that was really cool news as well. Do you want to lead this one?
You actually pointed me at it, so why don't you lead this?
I did. I spotted it. This is an update to Sims 4, which is really cool. So you've probably heard of the Sims series. It's been around since forever. I know I put a lot of time into Sims 1.
If you haven't, what the hell is The Sims?
The Sims is a game where you make people and you tell them what to do. It's a life simulation, sort of, and it's very much one about interaction between people. But the big thing, particularly for me, is you can just completely make people. You decide what they look like, what they wear, what they do, all sorts. And as games have gone on, you've got to be able to decide more and more and more. And this update goes one step further into being able to make a sim that anyone can go and play this game and make a sim like them. Previously, one of the things you've picked is their gender, and you've just gone, okay, male, female. And that was that, and that set a bunch of different things as well that aren't actually the same as gender, but most people assume they are, right?
Yep.
And then now it's come up with a more complex way of doing it. So I'm looking at a screenshot here of what the settings thing is going to be like. So you can just set up a masculine or feminine frame, different clothing preference, whether they can become pregnant, get others pregnant, or neither, and whether they use the toilet standing. And also apparently it unlocks all voice types, all clothing options, all hairstyles for all Sims, instead of locking it onto a particular gender, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since such a big thing about The Sims. I mean, tell me this isn't the first thing everyone does, is you try to make yourself, right?
I think most people do when it comes to character creators, unless you are, unless you're Griffin.
Oh, man,
unless you're
Monster
Griffin
Factory.
McElroy and Justin McElroy, the hosts of the Monster Factory series.
Although to be fair, I've never seen pictures of them. Maybe it's what they
They did actually, they did try to make themselves in WWE, but that's beside the point here.
Okay. I know the first thing I did in The Sims 1 was try to make myself.
Yeah, and I think I used to be super into this idea of like, oh, can I make myself in this character creator? And then I fell away from that because I figured out like the tool sets that games offer are limited enough that you can still make really cool stuff, and nowadays you could probably make yourself, but it was always something that was too tricky for me because despite being the owner of my face, I don't know really what my face looks like. So instead I just end up creating a ton of other kind of more interesting characters than myself.
I've moved away from it as well for the sort of reason that I like to try to tell or go through, depending on what the game lets you do, a character's story, and that's not my story, so I try to make a character who I can fit into that. But,
see, that's interesting because when I play, say, a Mass Effect game, despite my character looking radically different from myself, I still play them as if they were myself.
Okay.
Like, I still make all the choices that I would make in those scenarios. So when I was playing Mass Effect, I was ending up with a 50-50 split.
Think about it though. It's not completely like you, right? Because you're not just making dialogue choices. You're pulling a trigger a hell of a lot of times. So you
Yeah.
always have to have some. I mean, you don't have a choice in games like that as well. Weren't you telling me about there's an achievement in Uncharted 4 or something that's a bit of a joke around that? How Nathan Drake is this wisecracking guy in cutscenes, but in gameplay he's a mass murderer who's killed thousands of people.
Oh yeah. In Uncharted 4, you can get this trophy that is called ludonarrative dissonance. And that term refers to a dissonance, a mismatch between the gameplay and the story. So if you are telling a story about, I'm going to use Spec Ops The Line because it's a fairly good example of this. If you are telling a story about the horrors of war and how war is very destructive and bad, and still making your player an active participant in it by forcing them to engage in the world explicitly through violence and do all these violent things, and then being like pointing at it and being like, you're a horrible person, shame on you. That's kind of what ludonarrative dissonance is.
I think the example in Uncharted comes into quite well as well, because if anyone's played Uncharted games, you kill a lot of people, and it's never really acknowledged that to get to this point you've killed 600 people or something like that.
Oh god, no, it's not. Except like there's a moment at the end of Uncharted 2 where it's like, how many of my men did you kill to get here? And that's as far as Uncharted goes towards acknowledging that. And some games just like don't acknowledge it at all.
And it's such a common thing in games as well, isn't it? Like you can go into Skyrim,
absolutely.
for example, go into your character stats, and it's got people killed, several hundred or thousand. That's kind of nuts.
You're a mass murderer, and you're also the savior of the land, so you're allowed to get away with whatever you want, I guess.
But the fact that this is so common, I think, makes me appreciate games like The Sims, actually, where you have it's not the case where your only options for interacting with the world, or many of your few options are violence. Like in a lot of games, pretty much the only ways you can interact with the world are moving and pulling a trigger, or swinging a sword, or something like that. So I really appreciate games like The Sims or Minecraft or something where you can do something else and have fun with it.
Now, do you think there's a... oh, no, sorry,
No,
I
go on.
interrupted.
Go on, ask.
Do you think there's a problem with games that let you do that, necessarily?
That let you do what, sorry?
Sorry, that force you to interact with their world exclusively through violence. Because I don't, personally.
It depends on the game. Some games lean into it quite a lot and like it's their thing. Like Doom, for example. I've not played it, but you know what you're getting into, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason I've been avoiding Doom. Because I know that it is a game that is not going to be for me.
Yeah, no, it's same thing for me for Doom. But I really like building games, I find. Games like... well, a lot of these have combat aspects as well, but the buildings and stuff I really like Starbound and Terraria and Minecraft and what was that city builder game?
Cities Skylines?
Cities Skylines, yeah, that was a fun one. Kerbal Space Program, all these games that aren't just, here's a world, now go kill stuff in it.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I do like, it's not to say I don't enjoy games that have a lot of the interaction being violent, but that's not why I enjoy them typically. Normally it's because they've got a really good story or something like that.
Yeah, like with Fallout 4, which we talked about a little bit last time, where it's got so much interesting stuff going on in the world, and then the violence is... It's weird to think about this for a second, but it's very much... It's how you get from point A to point B. There's walking, and then there's shooting, and then there's exploring the environment.
There is dialogue, of course, but and you do expect with the post-apocalyptic world thing, part of the buy into that is it's going to be a rugged place and you're going to have to kill to survive. But I have felt let down sometimes when you'll find a cool area and think, oh, this is going to be really interesting, and it turns out it's just another fight. Like, you show up and everything starts shooting you instead of, okay, I'm going to spoil a location, so if you don't want Fallout 4 spoilers, the combat zone is an area you can go to where you enter, and what you see is, there's a couple of people fighting in a cage, and there's a bunch of people cheering on the side, and it's kind of like, oh, cool, someone told me I should go here, and I have, and it looks really interesting. But then as soon as you're noticed, everyone just starts shooting you and you have to kill them all. And that felt like a real missed opportunity to me.
Yeah, and that's something that the critic Tarek Musa talked about in a piece where he was talking about kind of the successes of The Witcher 3 at the hands of Fallout 4.
Yeah.
It's a really good article, and I will link that in the show notes because it is a worthwhile read. But yeah, it's kind of disappointing when games are set up like that, but like ultimately, I guess it doesn't ruin that game for me. But
yeah, I think there are aspects when it can cause conflict with the story, and like we've talked about Uncharted, and I found this in Tomb Raider as well, where the number of people you're killing kind of is really mismatched with the story they're trying to tell.
Oh,
and I think that can detract from it if it's mismatched for sure.
That is one of the biggest examples of that, even because
they started off okay with it being a really big deal, but then you went from it's a really big deal to kill someone to I just killed 100 people in the last hour really quickly.
They made it really easy to kill was the thing too. So like, oh, taking a life is really, really hard. And then it's more ludonarrative dissonance where it's like taking a life is hard and you just took it in like a split second because your first instinct in a shooter type game is to just kill on sight. So
yeah.
Anyway, that's violence in video games. But
which actually that reminds me. There's that game I've mentioned to you. There's a game I spotted on Steam a while ago, and I know that right at the moment, hopefully also when this episode comes out, it's on 50% off on GOG, which I thought had some really interesting non-combat options while still having conflict and encounters, which is called Renowned Explorers International Society. Which when you
is
have
a terribly generic name.
It is a very generic name, absolutely. But what it has, which I think is really cool, it has when you have encounters in this game, you can take a combat approach, but you can also talk your way out of it in various ways, and it's kind of tactical. You know, this option beats this option, and it's sort of like a rock paper scissors kind of way. But I really appreciated having a non-violent way to handle these encounters. I thought it was really well done.
Yeah. And I'll probably look into that. And by the way, this will be published in time.
Sweet.
GOG is running their summer sale for 2 weeks, so you can get a copy of Renowned Explorers International Society.
That's the most generic name.
It's the most generic name. I think it's 10 Australian dollars.
Something like that. It's a generic name, but I've had fun playing it.
Yeah, I've heard some more good things about it. So. Yeah, that's that. In other news as well, the Square Enix Hour is returning. Final Fantasy XII will be seeing a remaster on the PlayStation 4.
You've been hoping to play 12, haven't you?
Yeah, 12 it's one of those games that I remember hearing a lot about, and I remember that there was a game on the DS that came out, and I had a subscription to Nintendo Power at the time. So I got to find out about this game, and I was like, oh, all these characters look super duper cool, and all this gameplay looks super duper cool. So why don't I check this out? And never did.
I did have fun. I've played through almost all of 12. I've played through almost all of it, is the prefix I have to a lot of Final Fantasy games. I played through almost all of 12. I did enjoy the gameplay quite a lot, but compared to other Final Fantasy games, I didn't find the characters or story as interesting. But still, it was cool. It'll be cool to see it remastered because it was in dire need of some anti-aliasing when I played it on the PS2.
Yeah. And I mean, I imagine it's not too bad on an emulator, but just not going to be super great on that old era hardware.
So when was that coming?
That will be released in early 2017.
Okay, so few months away still.
Yeah, it's gonna be 8-9 months kind of away.
And going by what they've done with the other games, might come to PC 6 months to a year after that, if we're lucky.
Yeah, that was the case with the Final Fantasy X remaster. They released it on PS3 and PS4 first.
Which I'm still making progress through on PC.
Yep, and they then brought it to PC several months later, meaning that PC players still got it. It's probably sold. I would take a stab and say it's sold pretty well.
I don't actually know. I would hope so. I like it.
Well, there we go. So that's Final Fantasy XII. Again, early 2017, if you are interested in that remaster. Definitely going to be interested in playing that for the first time. And Final Fantasy 15 is this year, huh?
Is it? Because that's been around. That's been going for a long time. It feels like it's never coming.
Yeah, it feels like it is, but like, I've played the demo. One of the demos. I played the Platinum demo on the PS4, and it was really, really cute. It was really, really well done. So I'm interested to see how Final Fantasy 15 plays out, and that is, like I said, coming this year, assuming it doesn't get delayed for the umpteenth time.
When was it announced again?
Oh, back in like 2011, 2012, 2013? I don't know.
I thought it was much longer ago than that.
No, I think it was
at the same time as 13.
Like, I think it was announced then, but it's just been a work in progress for far, far longer.
Announced at 2013, but it was Final Fantasy 13 versus 13 or 13 versus before that.
Right. Okay.
So when was that announced? Oof. Sorry, I have to Google this now.
The answer is probably like a fuck ton of time ago.
Yeah, here we go. May 2006. Over a decade ago.
Holy shit.
I thought it was a long time.
That's a very long time.
That's why it feels to me like it's never coming.
And who knows, it'll probably get delayed again. And it's like, 2017. Guys, 2017.
2026.
2026. It's 2080 now. Final Fantasy 15? Guys, anybody?
Oh, by then it'll be fun. It'll be rebranded to 25.
No. Well, what was the Final Fantasy that was in Deus Ex Human Revolution? Because there was definitely a Final Fantasy poster somewhere in there.
I don't know. I've not played very much of it.
Okay. That is Final Fantasy 27.
Okay. They're a bit behind schedule then.
I think they're a little bit behind schedule if we're matching up with the Deus Ex future.
Do you think you'll play through Deus Ex in 2027? Have you ever played through a video game in the days it was meant to be going?
I mean, technically, I think I did that with... Okay, technically I did it with Assassin's Creed 3. Because when I first bought that game, it was...
It was in the American Civil War?
No. The modern setting was set in kind of like, this is in prep for 2012 Doomsday.
Okay.
And I was like, this is kind of cool. That's very timely. Because everyone was kind of like, there was this freak out about, the world is going to end on December 21st, 2012. And Assassin's Creed 3 in the modern era took place in that time frame. So that was something interesting. And then XCOM Enemy Unknown also actually takes place in 2015.
Yeah, I think I've played through both XCOM and Splinter Cell Chaos Theory in the actual time it was meant to be happening.
When was Chaos Theory set?
I can't remember. I think it would have been 2012 or 2011 or something.
That sounds pretty
I remember
reasonable.
Because it says at the start of missions, I think, what day it is. And I remember playing it at one point being like, that's today.
That's cool. It's always kind of, I think it's kind of weird when you can do that. It's like, this was supposed to be a vision of the future, and now it's going to be a vision of the past.
Well, that's when it becomes alternate history instead of a potential future, right?
Yeah, I guess so. it's kind of a weird situation to get into, I think, but it's cool. It's really cool. So let's move on to something that we wanted to talk about. We wanted to talk about the use of games and the stories within them to craft memories.
This is something I've been thinking about a bit.
All right, you want to go into this?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this in a few contexts. One is gaming, but I've also been thinking about this in the context of some books I'm reading and preparing my Dungeons & Dragons sessions. But so I'm rereading a fantasy series called The Wheel of Time. In this, there's a bunch of people who are magically bound to only tell the truth. But, of course, they manage to twist the truth so that they'll say something and get people to think they said something else by implication. And it got me thinking of the way they're thinking to phrase this is so that it will be remembered in a different way to what was said, and how that can get used in different ways in games and stuff as well. So I've been playing through Final Fantasy X again, as I've mentioned, which is a game that I played through years and years ago on PS2, and I'm now playing through again on Final Fantasy X. It's interesting now noticing the differences between how I'm experiencing it as I'm playing it compared with how I remembered it.
Right.
You fill in a lot of the gaps. For example, I've noticed in the dialogue, the cutscene type stuff, there's a lot of pauses, which I think comes down to just the limitations of when it was done. Like there's pauses between two different people speaking. My memory filled those gaps in. So it's been interesting thinking of how it's different just on its own, and how sometimes stories can use that to their advantage, I guess, so that when they go back to look at something else, you can see it in a different context. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I don't know. I don't really have a lot of thought on that. Like you've kind of hit the nail on the head, I think.
Sorry, I left nothing for you.
That's fine.
Well, it also ties in, right, to what sort of it's kind of like the generic name stuff we were talking about, right? But it's not just names. How do you make something memorable?
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's certainly several ways you could do it, and one of them is kind of bombast, which is something that the Uncharted games are very good at, for example. Or even the new Tomb Raider is pretty good at it. They're good at creating these really, really high action moments that are, pretty stand out. There's even the opening scene of Uncharted 2 is really stand out. Like it's this scene where you wake up in the middle of a train car that's hanging over the edge of a cliff, and like that's a pretty memorable way to start your video game.
And they kind of reinforce that, don't they? Because most of the game is a flashback from that point.
Yeah, exactly.
And they go back and reinforce it a few times.
So you're always looking for. I think in Uncharted and games where like an event is revealed and then you flash back, you're kind of looking for the, oh, is this where this happens moment?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because the game I've been playing, Final Fantasy X, actually, the very opening scene is set quite close to the end of the game, if you don't do all the side stuff once it opens out. And so the rest of the game is a flashback to that, and you don't know what was going on in that scene. It's not hugely confusing. It's just leading up to something you don't know what it is. There are a few games that do that, don't they? That will start with a later scene, and then most of the game will be done as a flashback.
It actually used to be a storytelling trope that I kind of hated.
Yeah.
And it was standout bad in Splinter Cell Conviction, where they would be doing this on a near constant basis. Like you'd finish a mission, and then you would flash forward to an event that would be taking place like 2 days later, and then you'd go back to playing the mission. So I'm like, okay, so you've ruined the entire next half of the story once I get there. Why am I playing this? And that's where I stopped playing it.
It's interesting. I played through Conviction, but I don't remember that. Maybe it wasn't very memorable.
Ironically.
Sorry.
Even Battlefield 4 did it. The first scene is actually really good. You are in a car that is underwater. Your team is trapped, and the car is kind of slowly filling up.
Oh, I've seen that. I've not played the game, but I've seen this opening sequence.
It's a really cool opening sequence, and it kind of establishes some characters pretty well, actually.
Cool.
Battlefields and first-person shooters in general just kind of aren't known for their campaigns, but they're almost exclusively what I play them for. So, I mean, that's a mistake, first and foremost. But moments like that can really stand out to me.
Yeah, definitely. The ones that aim to have an emotional impact, right? Especially where they succeed.
Yeah.
They fail, it can fall flat.
Something I can think of along that line is having super memorable characters.
Yeah.
Voss from Far Cry 3, for example. He is a huge antagonist in that game. And
I think he's the strongest character in that game.
He probably is, I would say. He's certainly the one that gets the most time devoted to him. There's there is a lot of that game where Voss is on screen. Like, I'd say at least a solid kind of 20 to 30 minutes.
He's on the box art as well, isn't he?
Yeah, he's on the box art.
He's the first thing you see about the game.
He was on, like, all the promo material and in several promo videos, and, like, he's clearly, like, the star of the show.
Which made it really strange when...
Don't say anything. There are just strange things that happen in Far Cry 3 that kind of take the spotlight off of Voss. Shall we say that?
I'm happy to spoiler behind a spoiler alert, but if you prefer we don't, then it's not. Yeah,
let's try to stick away from spoiling games as much as we can without, like, an explicit warning that.
Okay.
I'm gonna say, like, the first scenes and stuff don't count.
It's the first thing you see when you open the game.
Yeah, it's the first thing you see when you open the game. Or if it's in, like, promo material, doesn't count.
Although I do try to avoid promo material just because I want to experience the end game myself.
I think that's fair enough.
Anyway, let's keep going.
Yeah, let's. Something else that had the spotlight on them was the 7 deadly sins throughout DMC Devil May Cry.
Oh, I've not played that one. I played Devil May Cry 4, was it?
Everyone says DMC 3 and DMC 4 are kind of the best ones, and that DMC Devil May Cry was just like, everyone's being edgy. Look how edgy we are.
Devil May Cry 4 is the only one I've played. I don't know much about the other ones.
Yeah.
So what was the deal with these characters?
The deal with them is that, for the most part, they actually, like, totally subverted the kind of enemy design you would expect to see from the 7 deadly sins. So you ended up with these... you ended up with rather horrifying monsters in DMC Devil May Cry. And, like I said, it subverts the usual kind of design tropes where lust is like, it's this really sexy girl, you know, and she's got big breasts, and it's designed clearly to titillate to a presumed straight male audience, right?
Yeah.
And DMC Devil May Cry's version of lust is this horrific monster dude who is, like, not even recognizably human, more insectoid than anything. And there's some interesting stuff going on with how it tackles that design stuff.
Okay.
I'm gonna leave them out because they're best. Some of these details are kind of best left to you if you go play the game. There's also only so much that the explicit tag covers, so we'll leave it like that.
Oh, I see. It's one of those.
It's kind of one of those.
Okay.
So I think we'll leave that alone. But DMC Devil May Cry's character design and a lot of its environment design, in fact, actually 100% stands out. So that's made that game very memorable to me.
Cool.
So another element of news that came to light this week, in fact today, was that Watch Dogs 2 is a thing that's happening.
I still don't understand why. I was really disappointed by the first Watch Dogs game.
A lot of people were. I actually saw one of my friends today saying that it was one of the only games that they were so disappointed by that they uninstalled it from their system. I've had one experience like that, and that was with Transistor by Supergiant Games.
You didn't like it?
I liked it up until the ending, and then the ending removed a lot of the agency that the protagonist had.
Yeah, I can see that.
Stripped that all away and was like, oh, this is how the game really ends. And I'm like, that's some horse shit. Like, it was disappointing enough to me that I uninstalled and actually hid from my library Transistor for a little while. So, that was my experience with that. Well, I did not have that same experience with Watch Dogs. I was incredibly disappointed with the story. I think a lot of people were. But I really liked a lot of what that game did.
It had good ideas in it. I don't think they were hugely well executed.
Oh, it had great ideas.
In terms of gameplay, for example, the driving fell really flat, and that let a lot of the game down.
Yeah, it was very slidey. I worked around that really by just driving a motorcycle everywhere that I could, because I found that was the best way to get around.
Although you shouldn't have to make a choice like that to enjoy a game, right?
Well, normally I'm going to be making a choice like that anyway, because I'm going to be choosing, oh, I like this vehicle, or I like this mode of transport.
Yeah, but that shouldn't be because the others feel like crap. It should be because you think that one feels the best.
Agreed.
But yeah, so I felt the driving fell flat, but more than that, that wasn't really what made me not enjoy playing Watch Dogs. More than that, I just really couldn't feel like I was on the side of the protagonist. I just thought he was an intolerable asshole.
Oh,
really.
Yeah. Like, games like this are going to live and die on their protagonists for the most part. Though
Far Cry 3 had this exact same problem, although having an interesting villain really helped there. Having Vaas, we've just mentioned, that gave me something to go for, so I could stick with it and tough it through the boring as shit protagonist. But Watch Dogs 2 didn't really have that sort of goal I felt like I aimed for as well.
Watch Dogs 2 isn't out yet. You can't make a judgment like that.
Watch Dogs, I don't know why I said 2. It's just what we're talking about.
Probably, yeah.
Watch Dogs didn't have a goal like that I could aim myself towards and just play through the character I didn't like.
It was boring dude syndrome.
Yeah.
Classic case. Though, that doesn't have to be the end of a game's kind of value, though. Like the Batman games, or Mad Max, or anything like that. These games all have really boring dudes as their protagonists. But everyone around them is so interesting that it makes the experience worthwhile. Like, Batman has a ton of really, really compelling villains, and just other characters who surround Batman that make Batman a vehicle for the story, a medium for you to see everybody else, but he's the most boring dude in the room 100% of the time.
But you can do interesting stuff with shell characters like that, eh? You've got games that work quite well with silent protagonists and still having a decent story, like Half-Life and Chrono Trigger.
Yeah, and those are the most like classic examples of that. Even games like BioShock are, that's a fairly well acclaimed game with a totally I shouldn't say totally silent, but like 99.9% silent, because he's got like 2 lines at the beginning of the game. Like, silent protagonists can work, and everybody else around them can be way more interesting. Like, Gordon Freeman is not interesting. Everyone else around him, super, super interesting.
Well, even without actually say anything. These characters can still take on a bit of personality, which is interesting. But
yeah, there was
the fact that they are so silent, like you said with Batman, they become a vehicle for the player and lets them experience the story from within it that way, which can work well.
It's a blank slate, quote unquote. The problem with that blank slate is, of course, that it's usually a white guy.
Yeah.
And that can make it hard or boring or just throw people out of the game. And I respect that. It doesn't bother me personally, But it's something that I can totally respect because if I had the choice, I wouldn't be playing a white dude.
Yeah.
At the very least, I'd be playing a woman. Come on.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not going to bother a lot of people, but games are for more than a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly.
For everyone.
There is a whole variety of people to consider, which is why I so appreciate things like that Sims 4 update that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that is a game being made far more inclusive. Uncharted 4 also made their game super inclusive by adding a ton of accessibility options.
Yeah, and what sort of options?
Options to, for example, replace the button mash prompts with just a button hold. This was due to feedback that Naughty Dog received from players who had disabilities. They were like, oh, I loved Uncharted 2, but I couldn't finish the game because that last sequence required that I press buttons really fast, and that's not something that my hand lets me do.
Yeah, that's good feedback to take on, right?
Yeah, and they really did with Uncharted 4, and they've added an option to do that, an option for a lot of camera control, to make aiming easier, making just general vehicular control easier, so you only have to use the one stick and it controls the camera and the vehicle at the same time.
I notice games like SimCity and stuff often have colorblind modes as well when they've got a lot of overlays to show different information.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of why color coding information is really bad. Just in general, kind of UI and UX.
It can be useful, but it has to be done right.
Otherwise, it can be super useful, and it's useful to most people to color code that. But you have to have a mode that will work for people who have color blindness. Otherwise, you have potentially got mixed signals being thrown at your user about the level of importance of one of your warnings or anything like that. It can be very confusing.
Another accessibility I've seen is games with what they're calling a story mode, which is essentially people who just want to experience the story of the game without having potentially difficult gameplay that they might find frustrating to get past or whatever. And I think that's great to include as well.
Yeah, Star Fox Zero was a fairly recent example of that. That game was
Final Fantasy X has got one as well.
Yeah, and Star Fox Zero wasn't good. So we're throwing that out there. That was not a game that a lot of people liked, but it did
I've not played this one.
It did have the ability to turn off any damage that you received and just play the game for the story. It's a cool touch. I don't know that it's the most useful thing in Star Fox. In Final Fantasy X, though, like you mentioned, that would certainly be super useful, especially to anybody who doesn't particularly like grinding.
Or random battles. It uses a random battle system.
Yeah. So, yeah. Story mode's good thing. Dark Souls needs an easy mode also. Just saying. I get it. Dark Souls is a series that's supposed to be hard, but let people, some people do just want the story of Dark Souls because there's a lot of cool stuff that's going on in there. And
story is kind of an interesting word for it in Dark Souls because it's more like a puzzle you have to put together yourself.
Yeah, but that's still something, and I think
it's definitely something. It's interesting in how it's different that way.
It's something that people do enjoy in a game, regardless of if it's confusing or anything, too. It's just, I don't know. There's pages and pages of lore for Dark Souls, and some people just want to like read that. And I mean, yeah, they can read the wiki. That's not the same. Yeah, it's not half as fun as actually going through the game and being able to piece it all together yourself and being like, okay, so this is the thread that ties these two things together, and this is why they're all here, and blah 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 blah. That's cool. I'm super into that. Let's get back on topic though, and go back to Watch Dogs 2 for a second.
Okay, so how does it look like it's going to be from what they've shown so far?
It's looking like a huge improvement design-wise. So far they have revealed that the new protagonist is a black man who came from Oakland, California. The game is set in San Francisco, also California.
So someone who's pretty ignorant about the various cities in America, for me this is still, it's set in generic American cities.
Yeah.
Is that significant, those places?
Yeah. San Francisco is one of the most major cities in America, and it's a coastal city.
I knew that much about it being important and whatnot. Yeah,
it is. It's a fair bit more interesting, and also to the south. It's definitely more to the south, but I would say it's a fair bit more interesting than the original setting of Chicago, which was kind of a landlocked city, and there was a lake kind of in between.
Okay.
What's looking more interesting about Watch Dogs 2 is kind of like visually it's looking more interesting, setting wise it's looking more interesting, protagonist is looking more interesting. Like, that's all good. Here's my question though. Can a series that started with a broken entry be kind of saved by its sequels? Because with Watch Dogs, a lot of people got hit by the pre-order burn. I did. I was one of them.
Yeah, so was I. And I don't often pre-order games.
Yeah, and it had so much promise, and it promised a lot. Both visually, which we did see was downgraded, yeah, not super bothersome to me, but we also had a lot of promise narratively, and it didn't deliver.
I think it had good ideas with the hacking stuff, but I don't feel like it was executed very well. And
No.
I mean, I've seen games, franchises like Assassin's Creed. The first Assassin's Creed felt to me playing it like a tech demo. And then the trilogy of Assassin's Creed 2 improved massively on that. So, yeah, I think games that, when they first come out, aren't as great as you thought they could be. I think they can definitely be built on and, as you put it, saved. It can be a bit harder, perhaps, when the narrative of the first game leads directly into the second and the narrative of the first game led it down. That makes it harder. We didn't really have that as much in Assassin's Creed. So I don't know how that'll play into it here, but I think in terms of gameplay and having a different protagonist is definitely a good start, considering the protagonist they had in Watch Dogs 1. I haven't finished it, but I hope he died. Just saying.
We did not, unfortunately, get to see that happen. I will say, Aiden Pierce is alive and well.
Well, I could always install Watch Dogs, go play it, and just get in a shootout and not shoot back. Just for some satisfaction. No, that's pretty cruel, isn't it? Anyway, yes, I do think it's totally possible for bad games to be saved by good sequels.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think it's going to be a challenge for Ubisoft in this case, though, because Watch Dogs had so much promise. When Assassin's Creed was debuted, it was kind of an unknown, and it was. I think Assassin's Creed 1 may have been kind of a sleeper hit. It was one of those.
I know. I was very much. Me and my two brothers were very hyped up about it.
Okay. See, I don't remember too much of that era, so
Sure.
Might be totally wrong. But it also didn't really burn people on that first entry. Like, that first entry was widely regarded as being pretty good, if a little bit repetitive.
Yeah.
Which assessment I wouldn't disagree with. I wouldn't disagree with that. But Watch
No, I
Dogs
found
was
that exactly as well.
Watch Dogs was a series that started out kind of broken. So can a sequel save it?
Well, I guess we'll see. Well, I won't see because I'm not going to get it on release because I didn't enjoy Watch Dogs. If it turns out it's good, I might get it when it's down to $10 or $20 eventually.
And I mean, I'll probably get it within kind of a few months of release kind of time frame. Because, like I said, I totally enjoyed Watch Dogs for what it was. Did not enjoy the narrative. That was easily the worst part of the whole game. But it was still a serviceable game. And it was still fun to me and my friends who played. We like made up our own custom multiplayer modes, and I got into the online hacking multiplayer just a little bit. And it was good. But
if you know what you're getting into, it's so much easier to enjoy a game, right? Like if you go into play, again, because I'm playing it, Final Fantasy X, and you're expecting some sort of open world experience like Skyrim, you're going to be really disappointed.
Yeah.
But if you know what it's going to be like, that it's going to be linear, but it's going to be very story-based and narrative-based, then you're probably going to enjoy it. I know I'm enjoying it, but that's because I know what I'm getting into. You know, it's not breaking any promises on the outset.
yeah, I actually think that might have been what happened with Final Fantasy 13 to some point. Like, I think a lot of people were expecting that it would be super open, but it is a fairly linear game.
I think you're right that a lot of people did. I didn't. And I think because I didn't, at least, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Like, I knew I was getting into a fairly linear narrative game, and I really enjoyed it for that.
That actually all leads into a question that we got this week.
Yeah.
Yep. This is from Twitter user agenderbat, who asks, I'm just going to wait for Twitter to load here.
Oh, I see it.
There
How
we
open
go.
should open world be? Should you be free to do whatever, or should there be a solid plot line with affecting choices like Skyrim versus Mass Effect? That's really interesting, actually, especially since Skyrim and Mass Effect are both games that I've really enjoyed. But I also knew for each of them what I was getting into. If I had different expectations for each of them, if I thought Skyrim was going to be very linear, plot-driven, and Mass Effect was going to be a huge open world, I'd have been frustrated the hell out of it with both of them.
Really? You think you would have been frustrated with even Skyrim? Because like I think a game where you expected something kind of linear and it opened up significantly, I think I'd be more kind of pleased with that, I think.
Yeah, Skyrim as linear would be more reasonable than expecting Mass Effect to be open world. But I'm the sort of person who, when I put in a Fallout game or an Elder Scrolls game, I don't touch the main story longer than I have to, typically. I go off and do my own thing and have a lot of fun doing that.
Meanwhile, with Fallout 4 and myself, I've gone through the main story and I made that my thing because it was something that made sense for me to do. Because the game very much sets you up as, oh, you're a parent, here's your family. Oh, whoops, we kidnapped your kid. Go after them. And I mean,
done a much better job than like Skyrim or Oblivion or Morrowind did. I've played maybe 60 hours of Morrowind, never touched the main story. It just did not interest me one bit.
And Skyrim is like, you're a horse thief. You've been arrested.
No. The person who was with you was a horse thief.
Okay.
You were just caught crossing the border.
This is how little I remember of Skyrim's main story. The guy with you or near you was a horse thief and you got arrested at the same time. You were just crossing the border into Skyrim.
Well, I don't think it even specifies if you're coming into Skyrim or leaving it. So you can make it up yourself, whatever you're doing.
That lets you build a really interesting character if you know what you're doing. Like, if you know what you're writing now. It's like...
I did. I actually, once when I was playing Skyrim, got a real-world journal book, and would do that. This is my character, this is what I did.
Oh,
and
I started doing that too.
That was really fun. Yeah?
Yeah. I had 10, 12 entries in that. And I
think this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? About forging these memories. You do this stuff in the game, and then you go away and you think about it, and you let it stew in your head, and it turns into much more of a story than it actually was in game. Like what happened there mechanically was probably quite simple, but with a game like Skyrim or like XCOM, you go away and you make these narratives in your head, and that's the stuff that really sticks with you in your memory. And I think that makes those games quite special, even though it's something that doesn't necessarily happen all on the screen.
Yeah. It's the in-between moments that are kind of magical, isn't it? It's like...
It's all the extra stuff you plug onto it to make it super cool for you after having done it, right? Like you go and you clear out a fort in Skyrim or whatever, and then you go away and you remember all the stuff you did, and it morphs into this even more cool story because you think, oh, this is what the motivation might have been there, and this, oh yeah.
Or just
you
like...
can go up with some cool stories.
Or even just like stories of like scary shit that happens to you, or a narrow escape or something like that. Again, like mechanically simple, but still a fun story. Like, there's this time in Fallout 4 where I was exploring kind of down to the southwest, not quite at the glowing sea, but kind of near there. So
that's when it starts getting dangerous, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty high level area. And I ran into a Deathclaw. And 2 Mirelurk hunters, just kind of in the swamp.
That sounds like runaway material to me.
Yeah, that was runaway very, very fast. I saw all that. I booted it the hell out of there. Wasn't fucking being chased, though. Like, I didn't quite see what was going on. So I got up a little bit higher. I think it was this tree fort that was near there. So I got up in there.
Yeah.
And I looked around a little bit, and I spotted the Mirelurk hunters duking it out with this Deathclaw.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Want to take any bets on who won that fight? It was two Mirelurk hunters versus a Deathclaw.
I'm going to say the Deathclaw.
You would be wrong.
Really?
Really.
So did they both survive, or just the one?
Oh yeah, I used my peace perk, and they walked away, and it was all fine. No, the Mirelurk hunters actually did kill that Deathclaw.
Did they both survive?
I think one survived, and the Deathclaw got one of them.
Yeah.
And then I finished off the Mirelurk.
Of course.
I got some pretty sweet loot out of that too, because if I remember correctly, one of them was a legendary.
And a cool story from it too.
Yeah. But that's that kind of situation. It's exactly that. Like, it's a cool thing that happened to me in this game. It wasn't something that the game had scripted, but it was something that I remember because it was a holy shit moment.
And coming back to that question, this is stuff that only really happens in those open worlds, right? If you've got a game that's very linear, narrative-driven, you're not going to get this extra stuff that you can add on top of what happened because the game handles that for you.
But that's where
that can still be really cool.
Yeah, but that's where you get those set pieces, which is what kind of Uncharted is known for, and what.
Yeah.
Just kind of more linear games are typically more well known for these bombastic moments. Let's try to actually answer this question though. Like, how open should an open world, quote unquote, be?
I feel like you've got to pick one of those two directions. Either it's going to be pretty, well, not necessarily linear, but narrative driven and not so open, or have a completely open world. I think if you try to go halfway in between, it's a bit easier to get lost and not find you're driven really towards either side of it.
I think that there is a way to strike that balance, though.
Do you have an example of a game that's done it?
I do. Deus Ex Human Revolution. Because that game, it's open worlds, quote, but you still move through kind of central hub areas, and those are your open segments. And then the actual missions that you run, those are very linear and very focused. And it strikes a balance between that because it still tells an effective narrative, but it also is open enough that you can go and run and do all your side quests And that game can last you either kind of like 30 hours or it'll last you 100.
So that's interesting because that's a game where I found it tried to do a bit of each and didn't do very well at it. I've put maybe 5 hours into that game. I think I played through one of the missions and then sort of got bored in the first open world bit, I think. I didn't really get far enough because I didn't find it held my attention very well.
I think that's fair.
But hey, different games are for different people, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. I think to close off tonight as well, we have another question from Ruslin, RUSL_AN on Twitter, who asks about E3 predictions and reactions. Because that is this kind of week.
It is, isn't it? Oh, I always forget. I should remember because it's like my birthday happens and then it's E3. But I never remember.
It's E3 season.
What do you think's going to happen? You always have more prediction ideas than I do.
Okay. There's a lot of rumor kind of swirling around with the Xbox potentially seeing some upgrades and the PS4 potentially seeing some upgrades. Some people think it's because they have seen NX specs and gotten scared shitless.
Seen what? Sorry, NX?
Nintendo's upcoming console.
Ah. Is that so? That's a analogous to the PlayStation or the Xbox, in that it's not a handheld console like their 3DS.
We have no idea yet what the NX is.
Oh, okay.
All we know is that it is coming March of 2017.
Well, it's hard to get excited when you don't know what it is. Especially when the most important thing about a console is what do you get to play on it.
Yeah.
Games.
But I think they've been working on building their kind of launch library for long enough now that we won't have to worry about that.
Yeah, I always prefer to know than be told not worry.
Fair enough. But yeah, that's a theory that people have. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the Xbox is going to try and upgrade its hardware because it's been underpowered, kind of always. Since launch day, the Xbox One has been the less powerful console. And I mean, that's fine. It's got some good games on it. It still runs those games fairly well. But, that's fine. And there's rumors about an upgraded PS4. And I think that that's quite likely, actually, the upgraded PS4.
Now, you've told me before about some... I wasn't clear if it was an upgrade or not, but taking it in sort of a VR direction.
Yeah.
What was that? Was that Neo or something?
Yeah, this upgraded PS4 is rumored to be called Neo. To me, that makes sense as a Matrix joke, and it also makes sense that the PlayStation 4 Neo would still be a hardware upgrade, but it would be targeted at VR only. Like, it would be a PS4 that was VR ready. Because right now, to run the PlayStation VR, which isn't out yet, it's just available for pre-order, but on the standard PS4, you need an external processing unit that comes with the headset. You need a PlayStation camera, and you need PlayStation Move controllers. So it's a substantial kind of package of things that's required. And most kind of stand out is that external processor that's required. This is what makes me think that instead of all that, they could pack that external processor into the PS4 hardware and have that hardware only be accessible to VR games. So everything else still has to run the same. You can't make an upgraded version of XYZ. You can't have any kind of graphics settings or anything like that. You still have that same seamless experience. But when you plug in your VR headset, that extra processing power gets used just for that. Because Sony's already come out and said, your VR experiences, they all have to run at a minimum of 60 frames per second. And if they drop below that for even a second, we're rejecting your game. And all that, a lot of quality assurance stuff. And it would make sense to me that to continue that idea of assuring quality and assuring people have the best experience with their VR headsets on day one, that they include that in an upgraded piece of hardware and they continue to run that same console as we go.
So is that all what's been announced for the Neo, or is
Nothing
this
has
that the
been
Neo is very
announced for the
mysterious
Neo.
and this is what you expect it to be?
Yeah, this is my prediction.
Okay.
This is not anything official. This is
Do you
not.
think this is going to come out at E3?
I think absolutely it will be shown off at E3 because this is like it is the season of VR. Like we've had the Oculus launch. We've had the Vive. I think it's launched.
Vive? Is that another Oculus competitor? Just
It's
a VR headset?
manufactured by HTC and produced for Valve.
Oh.
Yeah, it's Valve's VR headset. So, and a lot of people say that the Valve is a superior headset as well. So that's my E3 prediction. We're going to see an upgraded PS4. It is not going to be for the general consumer, but it will be for the VR consumer. The Xbox One will probably see a hardware upgrade to beef it up more to PlayStation 4 standards or possibly above, which will be good for it in the long term. Not so great for the customers who have already bought that Xbox One. Just, they're going to be unhappy with that, I reckon. Other predictions, we're going to see a lot of games, I think.
That's always what gets me more excited, particularly since I'm not a console player anyway, so upgraded consoles don't really affect me.
Yeah.
And also I'm not a hardware geek. I like games. But I was excited about the ones I didn't see coming, so it's hard to make predictions.
Yeah, exactly. It's always like the surprises of E3 are always the most fun ones. Like when No Man's Sky was unveiled, I think it was 2014, 2015.
Yeah, that made a big splash. It won a bunch of like Game of the Show awards sort of stuff.
Yeah, because it was a game with a unique premise that nobody fucking saw coming. But like we kind of see these games like Watch Dogs 2, like we kind of see them coming from a mile away. We see a lot of
sequels,
these games that are
especially to
announced in the preseason, I guess. Yeah. We see them coming and then they just get dropped. But the surprises of the show are always going to be the best.
Yeah, it's what I look forward to, but it's just you can't predict it. I can't predict it.
Nope. All right, how you feeling? Is that going to be it for us this week?
Have you got anything else you wanted to raise?
I haven't got anything else I want to hit on. You got anything you want to?
I don't think so.
All right. Then in that case, I think we're going to wrap it up for this week. Mark, where can people find you on social media?
Oh, I'm on Twitter. My handle's Honest Universe.
All right. I'm on Twitter at CockatielCutie. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, shoot us an email. We are pausecastshow@gmail.com.
And we're on Twitter as well, not just our own accounts, but the show account. You can get to us there. That's PauseCast Show on Twitter. Yep.
We also have some exciting news. We're now on iTunes. If you're listening on iTunes, hello. Since we're on iTunes now, if you want to help us get a little bit of extra visibility and you're enjoying the show, feel free to go ahead and leave us a rating. If you'd like to find us on iTunes, bit.ly/pausecast-iTunes. And we will have a link to that in the show notes as well. We'll also have a link to the article about the Sims 4 gender updates, Final Fantasy 12 remaster news, and I think we'll probably link to some Watch Dogs.
Yeah, you were going to link to Tarek Musa's
article yes, and I'll have that link
to
the article about the failures of Fallout 4 and the successes of The Witcher 3, which were two of the biggest RPGs of the last year, if you did not already know that. I think, like,
If you didn't know that, you're probably not listening to this podcast.
well,
But it's okay if you didn't.
you know what? We assume kind of a high level of literacy in video games. No, I want to be serious for just a second here. Like,
Okay.
we assume that there's a lot of, like, super high literacy in our listener base.
When you say literacy, do you mean like familiarity with what's going on?
Like,
in video games, right?
like literacy in the video game scene, yeah.
Right.
Not necessarily like, oh, like, we assume that a lot of you guys can't read. But some people who are listening may not be as video game literate.
Absolutely.
So if that's the case with you, and you have some questions about stuff that we talk about on this show, send us an email. We'd be happy to answer your questions and teach you about what's going on in the world of games.
Yeah, it's always fun to tell people about games I liked and see if they like them too.
Yeah. Even like, oh, I played this recently. Do you recommend anything in the same vein? It's like, it's probably like one of those moments where I'll rub my hands together and be like, oh boy, do I ever. So yeah, you can feel free to send us an email. Our email is pausecastshow@gmail.com. And that's going to do it for us this week, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. I am Jessica Alouette.
And I'm Mark.
And we will see you next week.